So next we're going to have Miss Monica Maher. She is actually a colleague of mine. We went to undergraduate school, Master's in Social Work at Rutgers University, and she currently works in a practice of her own with a partner as a therapist, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks for having me. I met Professor Ivy in graduate school, probably now like 7 years ago, so it makes me feel kind of ancient. So I'm from a little bit of a different background. My master's is in social work, and so I work a couple jobs. I feel like in social work, it's an interesting profession because cradle to grave, there's a lot of options. Okay, so my master's is in social work. I have a license in social work. During the day, I'm a supervisor for child protection and permanency, which is formerly DIFUS. I supervise investigations. I've been in that career for about 11 years. And I'm also in the field, so I do on-call investigations as well. So in addition to that, I finished my master's in social work. I really value education, so when Professor Ivy reached out, I was excited because I think if you have a drive, if you find like a why for things you enjoy. And in master's in human services, social work, sociology, psychology, it is all about connections. It's about your ability to connect, your ability to influence. It's about things you find passion. But what I learned was that I didn't really find what I wanted until I had to rule out what I didn't like. So I kind of think of it as like dating. Like, unless you get really lucky and the first time around and you just knock it out of the park. But for the most part, you kind of get exposed to things and populations that maybe you feel very connected towards. Okay, so when I was getting my master's in social work, I was in two very, very low, very entry level, and I was the person in school that would go up to the professor and be like, "Are you hiring? Because I'm I can't do this anymore." And that's how I got both of my jobs while I was in graduate school. So I believe in growth, I believe in professional growth, and you get it in the education. So about networking, connections, don't hold back on approaching professors, or if you're in field placements, in approaching your advisors, about opportunities, because that's all about growth and that's what people want, okay? And that's where I started, and I started with child protection. So I'm still in child protection. And then after I started doing it for a while, I was like, all right, you realize it's time for growth. So I opened my own therapy practice. I don't advertise, I don't have a website. I basically just started writing emails. Hey, I have a license. Does anybody want a therapist? This is my background. And I remember being in role plays when I was in graduate school. And I remember being the person that I was so awkward. I was just so direct. And the feedback was oh, I would never go to her as a therapist because it's just too much, right? So I kind of shied away from doing that type of work, which I really now regret waiting as long as I did. I opened I went into a private practice in Morristown, and then I started my own in Mount Holly. So I take about 32 clients a week, between 27 and 32. I specialize in trauma. So the big push now is if any of you guys are interested in it, everything now I feel is pushed towards trauma-informed care. So the work I do is, a lot of the people I see have primary therapists that they might be addressing something with, and I do predominantly work around trauma. So I do what's called EMDR. Is anybody familiar with EMDR? Okay. Trauma is so interesting now because trauma is not, okay, yes, I do see people that have been severely physically abused, sexually abused. But a lot of people's trauma is just people that have an emotional component or something occurred to them that they have something that they feel stuck in. So I specialize in that form of treatment. I believe in it. I believe in evidence-based work. So the work I do is people that we're not going to come in and chit-chat. So every session I do is very specialized. We jump right into what could be somebody's most difficult part of their life or their worst day of their life. I invested in it. I felt like a lot of the work I was doing in therapy was, okay, I have my master's, can somebody hire me? But it was all about specializations. So what I found in just social work, human services is the more you build your resume, the more you add things and certifications, the more value you have. So I wanted to be an asset in my day work as well because I see a lot of trauma in that work as a supervisor, and also doing direct field work, I do on-call work, so I still see a lot of exposure to vicarious trauma. People are consistently at their worst. I wanted to do more direct work as opposed to, okay, I feel like I'm making referrals. Because that's what I feel like I was doing. I felt like I was in a position of, I'm just gonna make referrals. But that's really not what I sought out when I got my graduate degree. So the direct work I do is with people coming in who have severe trauma. They're coming in to tell you about, like I said, their worst day. And what we do is, in most conversations you have with people, EMDR, we conceptualize that you guys make eye contact. Like some people are making eye contact right now, we look eye to eye. But if you're like actively in distress about something, research, and it was like, they couldn't explain why, but when people were really emotional and then were able to move their eyes a certain type of way, we're pushing this formed belief that somebody stored about themselves. Okay, so I see somebody that says, I'm very depressed, I don't get out of bed for 3 weeks at a time. Like they're coming to tell you the worst part of like their life. And sometimes you are their only lifeline. I have people that come in and I'm like, we're working to discharge, but they're like, I'm not gonna be able to open up to anybody else. So it took years to kind of perfect. I've been doing it now for 2 years with EMDR, and I find it very rewarding. And like I said, I've worked in state for CPS now 11 years, but I think when people are coming in, they're coming to tell you about their worst day, and the impact you make, it's unbelievable. So I don't know if anybody, and this is a little bit different because it's a little bit more specialized. So therapy, I feel like when you start to go into therapy, you're like, all right, what are we passionate about? If you're going into a career as well and you guys are starting out, I don't know if you're gonna see this. People are gonna say to you, if this never happened to you, how are you able to connect? You're gonna see that in addictions. You're gonna see people say, if you've never used heroin, how are you gonna tell me to get off of it? And that's a hard conversation. You can learn so much in school. I look back now because I still get those lovely student loan payments, like the emails that are like, this is, okay, it's time. And I look back and I learn amazing things, but you won't learn in a textbook how to have a very difficult conversation with somebody. You're not gonna learn that. You're gonna learn exposing yourself to very uncomfortable conversations. So I think I became decent at having really difficult conversations with people. And I kind of used that niche, even though my feedback was always, it's a little bit, I don't know, maybe therapy's not for you, maybe just stay in CPS. But I gotta tell you, I've had so much success, I'm not taking any more clients, and I mean, some people I refer out, but there is such a need for trauma-informed care. So if anybody ever tells you, okay, you need to have to gone through something to be able to connect, no, you don't. Psychiatrists that are very successful, they don't have to have schizophrenia to connect with their clients. What you're doing in human services, I think, is all about connection. I've worked under supervisors that have masters in human services. They went back, or they were able to get some licensure with an MSW, but it's all the same work. It's just connection. So I opened a private practice. Like Professor Ivy said, I do work with one of my friends. She's upstairs. She does predominantly bereavement-related work, so I did get a certification in bereavement and suicidality. I always felt that was very difficult. And what I think sometimes is the best part is in therapy is like you're bearing witness to people suffering. So you can't always say like, okay, it's gonna be okay, because like it might not be okay. So I picked up a certification because I found that the more specialized I became, or the more courses I took, the more comfortable I was around having really difficult conversations where people are gonna come in and tell you, I don't know if I'm safe to go home because I don't know if I even have a reason to be here tomorrow. So I really found a lot of value in the work I was doing around bereavement and trauma. I then diversified to marital therapy, which is a big drive. So a lot of infidelity, 90% of the work I think a lot of therapists are seeing is more relational trauma. And in the midst of COVID, the number of calls I'm getting for therapy post-COVID is unbelievable. Of people who are like, I was locked, we were in quarantine for how long? Was it 2 years with a lot of restrictions? So people were like, I don't even know when I'm in public settings, like a lot of high levels of social anxiety. So I find the work extremely meaningful. I do find, obviously CPS, I find very meaningful work as well, and supervision. I do believe in growth. So I think when you guys are looking into a career, it's okay to expose yourself to certain things and say, okay, I tried this and it's not for me, but doesn't mean I'm gonna quit on the whole field. In my career, I've done hospice, I've done pediatric hospice, I've done, after graduate school, I actually had to go into a weekend program to finish the degree because I was working at CPS, and they had a lot of field components with my master's. And I remember when I was doing it, I was like, my gosh, I'm going to class on Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. I'm tired, I want my life back. But it does pay off. And I also think when you're looking into careers in human services, social work, psychology, people will say, okay, you're doing God's work. But I also believe in being compensated for what you're doing. So I don't believe that it is a volunteer. Sometimes I tell people, we don't work for, I'm not working for the American Red Cross. I do have to pay bills. Like, I have a mortgage payment, a car payment. So it's about, and I did like what Shanika said earlier about being an asset. She sounded like she was talking about being an asset in your career, in your employment. So I kind of bring that into a lot of the work I do in social work, or a lot of the work I'm doing clinically. I believe in networking. Professor Ivy and I have stayed in contact probably 7 years now, and a lot of our conversations were like growth-oriented network. Hey, I picked up my license. Hey, do you ever want to come into private practice? Hey, I might take interns. So I stress that the most in your career in human services. It's networking, it's professional engagement, it's putting yourself out there, having a lot more vulnerability. I can remember my first session in therapy. I was like, oh my gosh, they're not gonna come back, they hate me. And then I was like, wow, like I can't believe people are coming back. Like sometimes I'm still surprised, right? Because sometimes we don't see people get better right away. And I see that in CPS, and I also see that in therapy. And you're not gonna get a lot of thanks in some of the work you're doing until maybe towards the end of your career. So I say starting a private practice, it took a little bit of work, it took a little bit of around liability and licensing, but I accept 3 insurances. I do a lot of fee-for-service work, which I'm surprised. I'm in the Mount Holly location. I was in Morristown, which it's interesting when you move locations, you see different trends of referrals. But the volume where I'm at is pretty high, so I do commute up to Mount Holly, and there's certainly a need for it. Does anybody here at some point ever, with human services, has considered maybe doing anything clinical, or you want to push to clinical eventually? What makes you want to do clinical?
Because I think human services is really so broad. Like as I'm doing my classes, I see like I'm going towards a certain direction where it's more one-to-one with a person as opposed to like with a lot of people, if that makes sense. And I want to do like more therapy within mental health and addictions. So
That's good.
And it's not a lot of people out there that specialize in that.
No, absolutely. And what I find is that it's funny because it's so broad and you feel like you have all these options, and like I was always like avoiding macro work. Like being a director or looking at in figures like data. And those things are great for diversification in your career later, but it is doing individual work and micro work, and they say like, I think Mike said, in the trenches is where you learn. Like you'll remember your clients will remember you. You have an ability to change people's developmental trajectory to the point that you might not see it. Like I don't think I still see it in certain jobs I've had, like hospice, but you will see it, and you'll see that you can impact so many people, and you're not gonna know. The hard part is you're gonna professionally think, did I really even make a difference? Did I make a difference? I think it's about leaving people in a better position and being an asset to all relationships, and it's formed relationships. Human services, like I said, social work, I stand true that it's just about connection. If you're able to connect and you're able to really connect with somebody, even in therapy, if you're like, you come to an honest conversation that sometimes not every therapist is for every person coming into therapy. I've referred people, I'm like, this is not my specialization. You're gonna be better suited in a higher level of care, specifically addictions. Cradle to grave, I love the fact that in therapy, you can work and specialize in if it's hospice, if it's developmental disability, I get a lot of employee distress. I get a lot of professionals coming in that they're like, the only reason I'm coming in here is because I hate my job. And I need to come in here to tell you, I'm not ready to change it because I need the money, and it's a lot of employee instances, it's a lot of, if I have to go back in there again, it's passive suicidality. I really wish I'd lose control of my car because I hate my job so much, right? So it's not an easy fix. It's not like, you're just gonna have to change this. People are as ready for change as sometimes they're just not ready, they're not there. But you're there to actually just be their advocate, but also just connect with them. So I say it, these are the 3 things I specialize in. I say it just to kind of just influence people around finding your why, but also don't be discouraged. It's because I do find that this work can be very discouraging. If you go into, I think my first jobs, I was like, I think I was driving a bus with I was with Megan's Law Offenders, I remember. That's when I met Professor Ivy, and I was like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, this is like really intense. It was very unsafe, but that was like almost like an experience in a clinical dream. I look back at those parts of my life, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I did that. Like driving around Atlantic City, picking up people by myself. But it was such a humbling, and it was such like a clinical dream to see. And you're seeing people, again, consistently at their worst. And for you guys, being students and being professionals, it's okay to, if some point you'll be like, okay, I'm impacted by that. Like, I went into work one day and I thought I was gonna do this type of work, and like I've worked with people who've been in domestic violence relationships, and they get a job working with victims of domestic violence, and they really struggle. So it's okay to acknowledge that and then seek out your own help. And that's how you grow. Okay, so it's always like, is every therapist in therapy? But that's how you professionally and personally grow. So that's all I have to say. I really think a lot of this, and I talked to Professor Ivy, is more, it's about being growth oriented, and it's about being accepting. And if I were to accept someone's feedback, I wouldn't open a practice, which gives me opportunities. So I leave it with that. It's networking. I don't have any cards. My email is up in my Psych Today profile. If anybody had a question or curiosity about anything clinical or any therapy I could assist you with, or anything like career-wise or direction-wise. Anybody have any questions, or anybody interested in any? Yes.
I've been kind of interested in becoming a licensed social worker. Briefly, like how would that go about?
So to get your license, you would have to get your master's, and then the last semester, the programs, if they're accredited, you register for a test. You can get a bachelor's in social work, and then you can become a certified social worker. Licensed social worker is once you get your master's. And then right now I'm a licensed social worker, but I'm very close to my LCSW. I took a hiatus. I got so involved in CPS work, I kind of took a hiatus from my license, but I ended up going under clinical supervision. So I have to meet with a clinical supervisor and consult for EMDR. So specifically clients that we discuss that and how I'm helping, or what we can do to actually deepen or kind of further their treatment. So once you do your 4 years with your MSW, I did it a 4-year program, there's 2-year programs, there's 1-year programs, there's online programs. You take your test that final semester, and then you could become licensed in that state. And then you have to do 3,200 hours to get your LCSW. So, yes?
So because I'm a human service major, so I mean, my bachelor's degree would be in human services. I'm not sure if it's similar to what she was saying, but like how would that translate over if I wanted to do that? Because the current path states that if I go into clinical mental health, it'll be going towards my LPC.
That's fine. And what you can do is I would do some research on, because I work with some LPCs and LCSWs, and there's always this, is there a professional, I tell people all the time, it's doing the same work. Some people view it differently. I've worked with LPCs, I've worked with LCSWs, I've worked with PsyDs. If you're going for an LPC, just look at the credentialing between an LPC and an LCSW. Because you'll look at, okay, is it more in need in the area? I mean, LCSWs, because I have an MSW, I had to get my LSW and then an LCSW, but I do work with LPCs. My undergraduate was not in social work, was one of my biggest regrets. It was like, I never used my undergraduate, and then I just jumped right into graduate school. But if you were to get your undergraduate, I think you go into advanced programs. You could do it in 1 year, which I think is really intense. I did it in 4 years at night. I drove to Camden City 3 nights a week and worked in Atlantic City. So continue being driven. Yes, it's probably tiring if you guys or anybody's working, coming here late at night. Continue to just show up and do your best. I think everybody has unique qualities that you can always connect with people. People that maybe not every social worker is for every client, not every therapist is for everybody. I say that all the time. We're not for everybody. I'm not for everybody. Sometimes it's a round peg in a square hole. But if you are genuine to who you are, there are people out there that need people with your type of qualities, which is, I'm sure most people that are coming into a class like this have a natural way to connect with people and want to connect. Anything else in regards to trauma or private practice or clinical?
Let's give Ms. Maher.
Sure.
As far as psychology or therapy goes, with like being a social worker, is it like just like a regular like therapy, or is it?
Yeah, so there's positions like, you can't do it on a bachelor's level, but master's, the term could be psychotherapy, but you'll see like master's level clinician. Some people will title clinicians. I title myself psychotherapy because of the EMDR, so I do more trauma work. But yeah, it's mastery work. Don't be excluded if somebody's getting a master's in human services. I've worked with clinicians that go into homes that have a master's in human services. They're doing some clinical work with it. So do the research into the programs and find out what suits you and what's your best fit. I liked social work because I thought it was more specialized in my field when it came to CPS, and I think while I was in the program, I picked up a certification in violence against women and children, adolescent advocacy, and it was a sex offending program, a juvenile sex offending certification. But that's what I'm saying, being growth oriented, right? So these are all 3 different practices. But it was nice to diversify my practice so I wasn't just, okay, I only really deal with this. So yeah, it's just about being open to growth and opportunities. But yeah, I mean, master's clinician, master's in human services, it's just the research you do into the programs, I think, that best suit what you want to do. So, good to go.
Thank you.
Shoot me an email if there's anything. Good luck.